Hi everyone. We will be starting in a moment, so we're still waiting for people to join us. For those of you who have just joined us, just to let you know that we will be starting in a moment. I'm still waiting for people to join us. Right, okay, so it's just a few minutes past 5 and I think we can start. So hello everyone, welcome to our second webinar this season. My name is Angelina and I'm a Senior Programme Manager at the US-UK Fulbright Commission. So today we will be focusing specifically on the two placement models available to you at the US-UK Fulbright Commission. And before we start, I just want to highlight that this webinar focuses specifically on postgraduate awards for those of you who want to go to the US. And also this is for the academic year of 24-25. So if you're planning to start your program in the US this year, unfortunately, we no longer accept applications. So the format is the usual. I have prepared a short presentation for you, about 15 minutes, after which I will be very happy to take your questions. I do ask everyone to please wait until I finish the presentation to start submitting your questions, just because it's easier for us to handle them. And also, again, just a quick reminder to please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions. You can submit them anonymously if you want to do so. So let's start from the beginning. So I suspect that some of you are familiar with the Fulbright Awards program, have been familiar with it for some time. And in the past, there used to be only one way to secure a Fulbright Award. This is something we continue to offer. This is what we now call the independent placements model. So the idea behind this placements model is that you do research independently. You apply to as many or as few universities as you want. And this is one of the advantages of this particular placement model. So you have full flexibility. Also, if you have already secured a place in the US and you're considering deferring it, you can also do so. So on the independent placements model, we do accept deferred places. We also recommend this particular model for those of you who are considering Ivy League institutions only. Having said that, I do want to remind everyone that you will be assessed on your institution and your program. And this is something I will be talking about in more detail in a moment. Now, if you feel that you would benefit from some additional support identifying suitable institutions in the US, or if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed by the whole variety you encounter there, or you just have absolutely no clue where you want to be going in the US, that's perfectly fine. And for those of you, we have what we now call the IIE placements model. Now, the reason why it's called the IIE is because it's run by an organization based in the US. It's called the Institute of International Education. And this particular placement type is premised on the idea that those of you who are successful will be paired with placement advisors based in the US who specialize in your academic field, and they will work with you directly to identify a selection of the most suitable programs obviously depending on your academic interest, but also your placement advisors will take into account your financial circumstances. So you will not be assessed on institution choices. You do not need to mention them in your application. If you do have preferences, we very much encourage you to share those with your placement advisor, but you don't have to. I've worked with grantees who had absolutely no idea where they wanted to go. I've worked with grantees who had like a selection of quite strong preferences, so either option is perfectly fine. Regardless, you will not need to apply to those institutions independently, so your placement advisor will submit your application on your behalf, and then they will also help you manage the whole process of, maybe submitting some additional paperwork or arranging interviews, or whatever it is that you may need to do. Now, as I said, if you do have preferences, we very much encourage you to share those with your placement advisor. Now, a very important point is that we cannot guarantee that your preferences will be included in the final submission plan. Having said that, every single grantee I've worked with so far who sort of came to the first meeting prepared with a selection of preferences, every single one of them had at least one institution included in their final submission plan. The final submission plan is your final selection of institutions and programs. And this is something which is confirmed by your placement advisor and the US-UK Fulbright Commission. So a very important element is that you will be expected to attend one of the institutions on your submission plan. If you decide at any point that you want to accept a different offer, you automatically withdraw from the Fulbright program. So this is something very important, something for you to keep in mind when considering the two placement options. Now we're going to talk briefly about the awards and financial packages available on each placement option. So any Fulbright award can be secured as an independent placement. I normally recommend starting from looking at our partner awards, because some of them offer very generous financial packages. So all Fulbright awards offered in partnership with US universities include at least a tuition fee waiver and a stipend. Now, those of you who are considering different awards, less generous awards, for instance, the All Disciplines Award, again, I would like to remind you that the sort of the funding package you get, which is 45K, is final. So there is no additional funding available from the Fulbright Commission. And if it happens that you have a shortfall, that 45K is not enough to cover all your university expenses, which tends to be the case, it will be your responsibility to find the funding you need to secure a visa. So please bear that in mind. With the IE placements option, most of our awards can be secured on this particular track, except for the partner awards offered in partnership with US universities. Now, in addition to your Fulbright award, so let's say 45K if you're applying for the All Disciplines Award, your placement advisor will attempt to secure additional funding from your host institution. Also, most of you will be expected to take some tests, for example, GRE. This is sort of standard admission test in the US. Normally, all applications have to be paid for. So when you submit an application, you have to pay for each individual application. Now, all of those fees are included, so you will not need to pay to cover any of those fees. And finally, if you're on the IE placement model, you will be eligible to apply for the Opportunity Fund. Now, the Opportunity Fund is a pot of money which is offered by the US-UK Fulbright Commission to its already selected grantees. Normally, it's available to those of you who have explored a variety of options to cover any shortfall you're dealing with. But if you've been unsuccessful, and if you feel that you are still unable to afford your study in the US, you can apply for the Opportunity Fund. And again, just to clarify, the Opportunity Fund is available to those of you who are already or have been selected as Fulbright grantees. So as an applicant, you do not apply for the Opportunity Fund. If you are successful, we will share more information with you and explain how to apply for the Opportunity Fund. Something I have already mentioned quite briefly is the fact that if you do go for the independent placements model, you will be expected to explain your university choices. And this is the key assessment difference when it comes to the two placement models. Generally speaking, we assess applications in exactly the same way, except for this one particular element. And we will be looking for some very compelling, some very, very strong, and I would say probably unique reasons for you to be where you say you would like to be. And something I want you to keep in mind is the fact that the top, I know, 80, 100 applications, and I'm talking about the All Disciplines Award specifically, will mention very similar institutions. Most of them are going to be Ivy League. It will also be institutions, for example, like Stanford. Not every single one, obviously, but most of those applications will have exactly the same selection of institutions. So you really have to think very, very carefully, not just about why you like that particular program or that particular institution, but why you also feel that you're unable to achieve your academic goals elsewhere. And again, as I mentioned during our previous webinar, this is one of the key reasons why very strong applicants do not get shortlisted. And very briefly, a few words about the next steps if you are interested in applying. So again, just to remind you, the deadline is 5 p.m. on Tuesday, 2nd of May, and we do not give any extensions. I do recommend talking to a Fulbright ambassador on our website. So Fulbright ambassadors are our current grantees in the US or our recent alumni. And you can talk to them not just about their experience of applying for a Fulbright Award, but also kind of their experience of studying in the US more broadly. Also, some UK universities have an on-campus Fulbright champion. This is a permanent member of staff who is familiar with the Fulbright program, and they can offer some support with your application. So if you're interested, please contact us and we can let you know if your institution has a Fulbright champion, and if so, how you can contact them. Again, just a reminder, please make sure to read country-specific instructions. This is on our website. We have included, I mean, it's been there for a couple of years now, but the country-specific instructions have a checklist which we as readers use to assess your application. So it gives you a very good idea what exactly we will be looking for in your application. I also recommend approaching your referees quite early, or at least starting to think who you would like to be your referees. Remember that your referees have the same deadline as you do, so we need to have all references in by 5 p.m. on Tuesday, 2nd of May. And finally, you can also make a video appointment with our Education USA team if you would like to get some sort of more general advice on higher education in the US. They provide free and impartial advice. On this note, that's actually it. Yes. I'm happy to take some questions if you have any. Again, just a reminder that please do use the Q&A box for any questions you have, and my colleague Harvey will kindly help me with that. Right. Let's give people a couple of moments to submit questions.
Absolutely.
Thank you, and I'll have some water in the meantime. Right, do we have any questions coming in?
We do indeed. I'll start from the top. So we'll kick us off. How much on average do scholars receive for Ivy League Masters?
Right, okay, oh my God, where do we even start with that? So it really varies. So I honestly cannot share a number with you. One thing I can say, and this is based on literally what I'm working with right now, is that those candidates who go for the IE placements, they apply to both Ivy and non-Ivy League institutions. So I just want to make it very clear that if you go for the IE placements, it doesn't mean that you can't go to an Ivy League institution. It's just more the fact that it's going to be a mix of both Ivy and non-Ivy. In terms of the funding support, what we're seeing at the moment, and that may be very anecdotal evidence, is that those who go for Ivy League institutions tend to receive a little bit less support. It does depend. For instance, Stanford is a very competitive institution, not Ivy, but nonetheless, I know they have their own scholarships, which can be pretty much fully funded. So again, something for you to look into. But generally speaking, I would say their sort of financial support is more modest, and in most cases you will need to have either very considerable savings or support from financial support from elsewhere.
In layman's terms, how is the decision made on whether or not you are successful? And is there an opportunity to be creative in your application?
To be honest, well, that's a very big question, and I would first of all recommend that you consult the country-specific instructions. This is the main document, which tells you what we're looking for. In terms of how we assess applications holistically. So this is why I keep going on about the importance of things like mentioning or explaining your preferred choices, because you may be a genius with absolutely fantastic grades, absolutely breathtaking references. But if you do not follow certain steps, such as explaining to us your university choices, unfortunately, you will not be shortlisted. And that happens pretty much every single year, that we do have to sort of not shortlist, not interview some very strong candidates because they do not follow certain steps. So I would say this is probably the most reliable route for you to make sure that you submit as strong an application as possible.
I have been accepted to Harvard but haven't secured funding. Do you have any suggestions?
I personally do not provide funding. Actually, yes, well, I do have a suggestion. Contact Education USA. They are probably much better qualified than me to provide general funding advice. From my experience, yes, that is the case. It is very difficult to secure funding from Harvard. I don't normally work with many applicants who do. If you are very committed to going specifically to Harvard, you're not considering any other options, I would say look at, do some research into what sort of funding you can apply for Fulbright, the independent placement option, and hopefully, something will work out for you.
Hi, could you expand on what to include in the IIE placement personal option? Sorry, the IIE personal statement option if we don't have to talk about specific degrees, etc.
So we are not talking today about the contents of your application. There will be a separate webinar which will focus specifically on sort of, step-by-step guidance on what to put in your application. At this stage, I can only advise to read the country-specific instructions. This document does have a step-by-step guide. It's literally a list of questions which we encourage our candidates to ask themselves when they're working on their application. So please do, it's on page 8 or 10 or somewhere else, not the first page. So please make sure to scroll down and find that list. And this is, again, as I've said, probably the most reliable source of information at this stage.
Quite a broad question, but perhaps you can provide a rough estimate. How many scholarships are offered?
Right, so it depends on what you're looking at. So with partner awards, which is everything except for the all disciplines, it's one award per partner, unless stated otherwise. And I'm pretty sure at the moment we're offering only one award per each partner. With the all disciplines, it does depend on our budget and it does depend on how our interviews go. I would say we normally start from planning to award about, I would say, somewhere between 10 and 12 grants, and then we see how things go. So this is the average number of awards we offer every year. So I would say our average cohort size is somewhere between 20 and 25 grantees.
I have been away from university for a few years now. Does this matter for the references?
No, not at all. So in terms of the references, we do want your referees to be able to comment on your proposed study, on your suitability for the program, but they do not necessarily have to be your very recent academic advisors.
Quite a broad question again, but I think it might be useful for everybody to know. What makes an application stand out?
Again, I'm going to repeat myself. We do assess applications holistically. It's making sure that you kind of tick all those boxes. In terms of your interest in the US, depends on what placement you're applying for, your motivation to apply for Fulbright. So again, all of that is covered on our website. There is no kind of sort of recipe for success, and I actually do have access to the communication which happens or takes place between our Fulbright advisors and inquirers, and they get asked that question very often, and a lot of them read applications, and they do say exactly the same thing, that the kind of the beauty is in the diversity of applications we receive. So I do. Somebody asked me 5 minutes ago about creativity. So yes, absolutely, we do encourage you to be creative and to kind of be you, I guess, in your application. Something I talked about in my previous webinar is that we don't really do the whole Fulbright fit thing. So it's really about giving you an opportunity to tell your own story and to hopefully follow kind of a bit of a plan in terms of the information we want you to provide in the application. But there is no like right or wrong way to do that.
Is there any future contract with Fulbright, with the Fulbright Commission, with the students after they complete their studies?
In terms of contracts, I wonder if the inquiry could clarify what they mean by that. So there are terms and conditions, but which everyone has to sign. A set of terms and conditions is issued by the Fulbright Commission, then there is a set of terms and conditions issued by the IIE. So there are certain rules and regulations which you're expected to follow. In terms of our expectations of you after the Fulbright grant, no, not really. So we do hope that you will stay engaged with us, that you will participate in events, that maybe you will want to join us in sort of reading applications or interviewing. So there are opportunities for you to be involved in what we do after your Fulbright grant, but there are no expectations as such.
Okay, we've got a really interesting question here. Are learning differences considered for applicants who received a 2-2 in their undergraduate results? For example, somebody who received a late diagnosis during their undergraduate study.
I would definitely encourage you to be explicit about that. I know that this may be a little bit awkward. Not everyone feels very comfortable, but the more information we have, the easier it is for us to make a fair judgment. And, again, based on my experience of working at Fulbright, I do remember very well one grantee who had a 2-2. And that did not prevent them from getting a Fulbright award. I do remember again working with an applicant who is severely dyslexic, and that was very obvious in their application. And again, this is something we do take into account. So we will never, sort of grade you down, mark you down for, things like, issues with like writing or spelling, especially if you disclose that information. So this is why we very much encourage you to be sort of honest and open about that.
When explaining your uni program choice on the independent placement, how much detail can you specify while applying to 3 to 4 schools? Is this reasoning for each of the 3 to 4 schools?
In terms of the amount of detail, so it's ultimately up to you, but yes, so we will be looking for information about each school, each program, and I do advise against making some sort of generic claims such as, oh, all of these schools have fantastic members of staff, or, excellent research facilities, or, exciting international student body. All of that may be very true, but other people will be making exactly the same comments, and we will be looking for some very specific reasons for each institution. So again, I guess a question for you to consider is whether you actually want to be applying to 4. If you do want to apply to 4, then you will need to think about how much information to share. It's also fine to, if let's say you have one preference and then the other 3 are kind of other options you're considering, it's fine to focus on one institution more than on the other 2 or 3. But again, as I've said, it is important that we have some very specific, and I will even say very unique reasons why you need to be at one of the schools you have identified.
Quite a broad question. Perhaps the inquirer could provide a little bit more detail, but could you elaborate on the Fulbright BAFTA scholarship, please?
Well, I'm not quite sure what exactly that means. All the information we have is available on the website. I can't really add anything other than what is there. And with partner awards, also one thing to keep in mind is that we cannot really advise on whether somebody is eligible to apply for a partner award based on the title of the program they're going for. We can only assess final applications, and we do need to have input from the partner. So I would say if there is something you're very unclear about, feel free to clarify your question in the Q&A box, or you can just email us directly, and then we will see how much information we can provide.
Are there any Fulbright resources to seek funding to visit your chosen school or schools for an open day?
No, unfortunately, we do not have any additional funding for that.
Okay, I've reached the end of the current questions. So if you have any more questions, please do put them in the Q&A box. I'll give you a minute or two just to
Yes,
see if
thank
there
you,
are any
Carl.
more.
And yeah, while people are thinking whether they have any further questions, we will be running more webinars, at least one more, probably within the next month. And that webinar will focus on things like what we look for in the application, what to focus on, what to think about in addition to the academic work you want to do. So do keep an eye on the events page. This is where we'll be advertising our next webinar, and obviously social media.
So just to clarify, the Fulbright Opportunity Fund is only available to those who are accepted on the IIE placement and not the independent placement.
Exactly. So this is, in the past, it used to be available to both, or to kind of everyone. Now it's only the IE placements, or the grantees who are placed by the IE, only they can apply for the Opportunity Fund. Right. Have we got anything else coming in?
Just got one, just as you were
Okay.
speaking
Yep.
there. If focusing on one school in the independent placement, do we still touch upon our secondary schools, but as alternatives with smaller focus on reasons behind the secondary schools?
So the short answer is yes. So basically, all the institutions you're seriously considering attending have to be explained or accounted for in your study objective or your personal statement. So it is very important that you mention all of them. It's up to you whether you decide to allocate the same amount of space to each of them, or whether you focus on one institution because that is your clear preference. Again, it's entirely up to you how you structure that, but it is important that you mention all of them in your application.
Does your university have to be a Fulbright partner in order for you to apply?
No. I assume this is probably something related to the other side of the Atlantic. So no, we accept applications from anyone and anywhere in the UK, as long as you meet our basic requirements. And you don't have to be at university right now to apply either.
Last webinar, I had got some information about working while in the US if successful. I understand that this work should usually be within your field of study. Can I find more information about this on the website or with an ambassador?
So the answer is not really. So we do not provide that information because we do not authorize that. So all of that is done through the IE. So each grantee, regardless of the placement option they select, will have a sort of IE support person when they're in the US. And this is how work authorization works. So it goes through them. So we don't have any resources. Fulbright ambassadors may be able to share with you their experience of having, let's say, a part-time job or an internship, but again, they're not qualified to provide any sort of visa-related advice, such as how many hours you can work, what exactly you can do, where you have to be based, and so on and so forth. Another reason why we do not provide a lot of detail is because we do not want our grantees to be going to the US with an expectation to be able to work. Because in many cases, our students or our grantees do not necessarily sort of have an expectation of how intense and intensive their academic work will be in the US. So we want them to go there, kind of get a bit of experience, see how things are going. And then if they feel that they are in a position to get a job, they're very welcome to do so.
So this inquiry, their connection cut out earlier, so it might have already been said. But what would you say are the most important things to prioritize in your application in the independent placement?
We will be looking for everything. So whatever is in the country specific instructions, whatever we are asking you to do in the application. So again, just to reiterate, there are no kind of important things and not important things in your application. If we are asking you to, do something in your application, tell us something about something in your application, you need to do that. So all of that is important.
I believe I read that a scholarship may not be offered to someone who has spent substantial time in the US already, but is it ill-advised to include information about more brief time spent in the US?
It's if it's if you've been to the US on holiday, this is really not going to affect your application. It's more things like if you have family and you have lived in the US in the past, for instance, or I would say kind of we often receive applications from the candidates who, let's say, are UK citizens and who are currently in the US completing their bachelor's and they want to do a master's. This is when it gets kind of complicated. In most cases, such individuals are actually not eligible to apply. So it's more if you've done some significant work experience or study experience, if you've gone to the US on holiday, again, this is fairly unlikely to affect your application in any way.
So we've reached the end again. I'm going to give you a couple more minutes if you have any more questions for us.
Right. Well, if we're not getting any questions, then again, just to reiterate that there will be another webinar focusing specifically on the Fulbright application. So thank you everyone for attending tonight. We have recorded the webinar and it will be made available on our website and somewhere on YouTube as well. So if you would like to rewatch it.
So we've just had one in there.
Okay.
I believe we've touched on this previously, but I said a little bit more. Is it okay to use an academic supervisor after 4+ years since university?
Yes, absolutely. That's, as I said, it really, as long as this is not your family member or friend, it can be an employer, it can be an academic supervisor, it can be somebody else, through work who can comment on your kind of proposed study, on your intended work in the US. So that's perfectly fine.
This one might be a little bit difficult to answer, but are there any tips for those specifically applying for creative arts masters? Does it vary or differ at all?
Not really. One thing is that we encourage these candidates to submit sample work. Again, there is a bit, some guidance on that in the country-specific instructions. But in terms of the assessment criteria, it's exactly the same. So we assess all applications in exactly the same way in terms of what we actually look for in those applications.
Are there resources on the website for finding courses? I know which master's degree I would like to complete, but find it tricky to find schools other than my current interest.
I would probably say talk to Education USA. So the Fulbright kind of commission, the Fulbright Award side of the commission, we do not offer any guidance, I'm afraid. Again, I would say consider the IE placements, because if you do have a strong preference, I would very much encourage you to include that in your submission plan, and it's fairly likely that it will be included. If you're very set on independent placements, yeah, I would probably say Education USA. They might be able to offer some additional advice.
I've got a question here. It might be a little bit difficult to answer, but I think it's a little bit philosophical, so I'll pose it to you. What was the best application you've personally come across read for a Fulbright scholarship, and why? Is there anything you can reveal, or?
I do, there are certain applications which kind of come up in my mind when people ask me. And I guess the first point is something I've said today. They are all very different. And I think the best ones are the ones which, and again, this is something I mentioned in the previous webinar, are the applications which demonstrate that the candidate thought about not why they are right for Fulbright, but why Fulbright is right for them, and sort of that relationship, and what they can take and what they can bring and what makes them unique. Sometimes people tell very, very interesting personal stories. You don't have to be very open in your personal statement. It's really about how comfortable you feel. But I would say, do not be afraid to be yourself in your application.
Are there any instructions regarding reference format that we can provide to our referees in advance? For example, is it long form, and are there online samples for them to get an idea of what kind of information to include?
So basically, this is a form which is set up in the US, and your referees automatically get that when you input your details. So, as far as I know, unless that hasn't been changed, there are basically three elements to the reference form. So the first one is questions about things, how they know you, how long they've known you, and so on and so forth, their job title. And the other bit is quite generic in the sense that your referee can either provide whatever or write into whatever they want in like a box, or they can even upload their reference as a file. So it's entirely up to them. Our guidance is to our recommendation is for candidates to maybe even share their study objective or maybe not say personal say, but study objective and what their academic aims in the US with the referees, and obviously tell them you're applying for Fulbright, so that the referee can think about why they think Fulbright is a good choice for you, and also why they think maybe you need to go to the US, why they think you will be successful. So really, it is up to them. There is no sort of specific strict guidance on what exactly they should be writing that for.
You've reached the end again, so I will give you a brief pause if there are any further questions to end with.
Right. Have we got anything?
I've just received a thank you to both of us. So
thank you very much. Well, I think on this note, we can probably wrap it up. So once again, everyone, thank you very much for your attention tonight, and I hope you have a good evening.